Thanks everybody for joining us today and for our Be Headstrong podcast. And I am over the moon excited because Tanya doesn't want me to keep this flowery. So I'm going to just be like nothing but sparkles and unicorns right now. I am over the moon excited to have Tanya Thorn, our town councillor, join us today. And as I know, many of you equally love Tanya as much as I do and what she brings to the community and her passion behind mental health. And she's just been such a vital part, honestly, to the Headstrong program itself in supporting little old me. And I really appreciate everything that she does for the community. So let's get started. Welcome, Tanya.
Thank you very much, Pamela, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Okay, great. So, Tanya, I know personally, and I'd just like you to share with everyone else, your passion behind mental health and why really you're an advocate of it.
Yeah, it comes from a couple of things. One, it would be naive, honestly, from my perspective, for anybody to say that they haven't had mental health challenges in their lifetime. Especially if you're over the age of 40. You know, there's lots of stats that say 1 of 2 of us over the age of 40 has dealt with or is dealing with a mental health issue. So to say that you haven't, you're not being honest from my perspective. So I've had my own challenges over the years, and you know, I still to this day, I struggle with some anxiety things, but I'm conscious of it and aware of it, and I have been able to put words around it. You know, so I've had my own issues, but really this last year really impacted me as I watched my own community, as a leader in a community, my own community, and what was happening here. And I realized that I needed to, as a leader, come out with a voice and start naming what mental health is and what mental health isn't. And really starting to create that spot for open dialogue and pieces about it. So I've just become very passionate about creating a space that it's okay to talk about it. Because, you know, Connie, in our pre-conversation, we talked a little bit about stigma, right? So there's a different stigma to saying I'm dealing with depression versus I'm dealing with cancer. Cancer, everybody surrounds you and let's support you and what can I do and let me bring you meals and let me do this. Whereas depression, all of a sudden it feels like you're all by yourself. But they're both health issues. That's at the end of the day, they're both health issues. But we keep putting the word mental in front of mental health issues, right? And so we create this diatribe, I guess, of that they're different, but they're both health issues, as an example. Anyways, there's my long spiel to why I'm passionate about it.
That's actually a really great point, Tanya. I think sometimes we forget, why do we make that differentiation? Why do we think that somehow this is different than the rest of the whole body? And that's an incredible perspective. And I think you just gave a lot of people permission to realize that this is an absolutely normal human experience that we all go through.
It absolutely is. And it's interesting to me of how we differentiate them, right? So whether it's an addictions issue, an anxiety issue, they're still health issues. They don't need to be described as being mental health issues. They're a health issue. So we really need to change the dialogue around it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, I always find it interesting that when we talk about physical health and physical well-being and getting out and running and doing all of those activities, that we support our mental health, but we don't seem to be able to backwards engineer, for lack of a better term, on how it all ties in together. So yeah, it's a learning experience, and I do think that we're growing leaps and bounds right now through COVID. It's not really giving us a choice, is it?
No, I think, you know, I guess if you want to look at it as an opportunity out of COVID, is it really, from my perspective, this past year has highlighted, one, the lack of knowledge of supports that are available in the community. So people they haven't really looked for it. We've always been able to just kind of cope and keep it at the, you know, brimming underneath the surface. but it's also really highlighted the lack of investment and focus in the area.
Mm.
And so it's resulted in this conversation that's had to change because people are dealing with isolation. And so the issues have become more to the forefront. More people are experiencing it. You know, our business owners as a particular segment, not only are they dealing with economic challenges, but the stress that's related with that. And I think that's the thing people look at. We all say we're stressed, but nobody will deem that as a mental health issue. Well, stress is the primary base cause pretty much for every mental health issue out there. Is that stress piece, right? So I think COVID's given us this opportunity to really start to flesh out the conversation and put some focus to investment in the area.
I agree 100%. And you touched a little bit on it, Tanya, about what you're noticing in regards to mental health around the community. Could we be a little bit more specific on, as we know, men and mental health, there tends to be a fall down there, right? And a little bit of opposition. So specifically to our community, what are you finding?
Well, do you want me to specifically talk about on the male side of it, or just in general?
You could do in general, but I would also like to kind of zone in a little bit on men.
Yeah, I think in general, I'm seeing a significant increase in stress. You know, we're a year into a situation none of us could have imagined. Let's be honest, none of us could have created the situation we've seen this last year. So the stress levels have been so high now for 12 months. So we're starting to see burnout. That's what I'm seeing. And so in that, we're seeing, you know, shorter fuses. There's an increase in frustration. People are disconnecting. I'm seeing a lot of people disconnect and withdraw. It's easier to be isolated because you're working from home, and so you don't have to go out. I'm hoping with some of the relaxation and rules that'll start to shift again, but which then is creating a echo chamber, I think, in social media. That's really one of the places that I'm seeing it. So we're not recognizing that there's been a really big withdrawal from social media from a lot of people. So it's creating this echo chamber that the world is bad. That's what I see on social media. There's no hope. Everything is bad. And so when you start taking away any framework of there being hope, that creates, in my opinion, more of that bad cycle of how do I get myself out of this? You know, and I think in our community, people don't know where to turn. And because they're isolated, they don't know who to talk to. So those are some of the things that I'm seeing. And then of course, around men and mental health, you know, that gets into a bigger conversation because we've got that whole gender bias that relates there, right? Men are supposed to be strong. Men aren't supposed to cry. Men aren't supposed to feel emotion. So to have them come out and actually want to talk about that, they've been groomed from birth that they're supposed to be the strong, powerful ones, right? And so creating that safe space for them to let the guard down and recognize and process emotions that I would say a lot of friends in my circle that are men don't even know how to name, because they're not taught how to deal with emotions. We plow forward and we don't need to deal with it, right? So I think our men are seeing some impacts to that.
So I want to talk a little bit, Tanya, while we still have some time, about what do you think can make the difference, and make the difference specifically in our rural community?
Well, I think events like this are important, but I think it's that open dialogue. You know, I think it's working at dispelling the stigma around it. You know, I talked about emotions. It's teaching people how to name the emotions that they're feeling, right? We tend to only hear about happy, sad, and mad. Well, there is a huge range of emotions outside of those three, you know. So if we can start to put a word to what we're feeling, and then that allows us to dig into the feeling or what triggered it. Okay, so what made me mad about that? So I think that open dialogue is the first one. And in that open dialogue, and I said this in my opening, we need to change it from change the understanding that mental health is just a health issue. It doesn't matter that it's happening in your head. It's still a health issue. It's still connected to your physical body, right? So there's that. The other piece is education. And that's, knowing what we're dealing with, getting an understanding of what that is, knowing the facts, understanding those facts. And I think when you have that education, that creates that natural first step towards creating some hope of, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one that's dealing with anxiety. Oh, I'm not the only one that's gone through depression, through a divorce. So all of a sudden, when you create that space that you're not by yourself, that there is this whole other group of people that have had those same thoughts. So I think those are all great things. And that's, the becoming headstrong, I think that just creates that space for there to be a conversation. And then it gives license for others to do things like, Sarah mentioned, of creating support groups that they align around, I'm a single parent, or they align around just parenthood in general. Parenthood in general is its own mental health issue in its own place, right? But making that place, that safe place to come in and be, Pamela, you mentioned it, being vulnerable and being, I post every day, it's okay not to be okay. We do not need to be perfect. It's a matter of get up today and do your best. And your best today might not be the same as the best yesterday. But if you're trying your best to do that, I think that makes our community the big thing. And the other piece, I think focusing on what you're talking about with businesses is fabulous, and that's important. But I think the piece from my perspective that is still missing in the gap is our kids. Mm. The stats show that 70% of mental health problems start in childhood or adolescence. So, but yet they are the one group with the least amount of access to services. So 70% of our long-term issues are happening in childhood, and they have the least access to services. To me, we talk about the costs of our education system and our healthcare system, but we're not willing to invest on the front end of it all. It's this great circle. And so I think having those wholesome conversations around it, and showing people it's okay to want to talk. Sorry, I keep talking. I said I wouldn't have much to say, but I keep talking.
That's what we want you to do. We want you to share your wisdom and your passion about this. That's what I love about you. And thank you. I can't agree anymore on, especially when it does come to youth. And the nice thing with this program, and I'm not sure if everybody's aware, is that even though our main focus is on entrepreneurs, that will trickle into the family unit and then go into the employees. So we have the privilege of encompassing the community as a whole. We're coming through the aspect of an entrepreneur. And I would really welcome everyone to go on to the Headstrong website, where Connie might be able to help me here, but I believe in the next month or two, we're going to be speaking specifically in reference to youth. Mm-hmm. And Connie is quite the expert when it comes to youth, and I'm going to let her just lead the way a little bit. Have a few words, Connie, in reference to that?
Sure thing. Yeah, no, and we echo what everyone's been saying about the importance of the family. I mean, if you want to change the game, you need to work with the parents, right? And who's holding the parents? Well, the jobs, the entrepreneurship, the employer, the workplace. And so this is an incredible opportunity to change the game, move the needle on mental health. And so that is exactly what we'll be providing through the Headstrong program. As well as just this week, we started Real Talk. I always mix this up. Real Talk for rural Alberta. Everybody say that 5 times really fast. See how you do, Real Talk for rural Alberta. And I'll tell you, this week we started on stigma. We're diving in deep next week with substance abuse, and we're going to be tackling suicide. We're being brave. We're looking at these things head on, and we're saying we're going to talk about them. And we talked very extensively this week about stress. And so we will continue those as well as adding in just some workshops for youth and families.
Well, and I think the other thing that, again, come back into that facts and understanding is that the focusing on workplace mental health, it has an economic impact. In this country alone, and these aren't current stats to this year, and because I can't find current stats for this year, but 500,000 employed Canadians per week are not going to work because of mental health issues. The cost to that, the economic burden, is about $51 billion per year. That's the cost. So if you want to talk about why focusing on that workplace, like you guys are doing, is important, is because we need to dispel that workplace mental health. As employers, we need to raise that up as a level of priority. And every employer, I challenge them to raise that conversation and make it okay for employees to come forward. Make it okay for them to access services. But it's funny, that disconnect, right? We don't see it as a health issue. Disability leave for mental illness costs us double what disability leave for physical illness does. So those are all elements of why mental health needs to be there. It's costing us huge money from an economic output perspective. And when you take and create, an employee that isn't able to come to work, it creates that whole self-perpetuating thing of they don't feel value because they're not at work, because they're dealing with this mental health issue. So then they feel less valuable, and it keeps creating that cycle. Whereas if we can give them the right supports and get in there proactively ahead of time before they're at a crisis state, right? So start to recognize some of those signs early on and create the interventions. That I think is key as employers, and why I think, why I came out strong supporting Pamela on this program for our entrepreneurs. Because sometimes, our entrepreneurs, they don't have an employer. They're the employer, the employee, and they're everything, right? And so we need to recognize that there isn't somebody that's looking out just directly for them, because they've got to do the work and look out for themselves. So how do we create the structures to make sure that they are being nurtured and supported in whatever fashion that can be, right? So, but I think it's that facts and understanding. I don't think people truly understand the cost to us across the country of workplace mental health.
I love that, Tanya. Thank you so much. And just to wrap it up for the final pointed question for you today, because I haven't picked on you enough. What are you hoping that Headstrong brings to the community? What's the outcome that you want to see?
I could come up with lots of outcomes, but I think probably the biggest one is about creating a community around mental health. So, sometimes you don't want to come in and talk in a big group like this, but if all of a sudden we create some synergies where, Sarah from Business XYZ can connect with, I'll pick on somebody else that's on the call, Tia, that's, from Business XYZ, and they feel a connection for whatever the issue was that came up. And then all of a sudden they've got those resources to talk through. And I think removing the stigma, so that there's not the stigma of, oh, well, Tanya said she's dealing with anxiety. Ooh, I don't know if that makes her a very good leader. Whereas for me, I'm like, it absolutely makes me an awesome leader, because I acknowledge my shortfalls and acknowledge my struggles, right? But that we remove that stigma and create a conversation around it of, we're all struggling. It might not be the same X, but we all have challenges, and we all have either connections into more resources. But I think sometimes is that mindfulness, or that ability to find somebody that can hear you and talk in a language that you can get it. Sometimes that's all the support we need. It's not about upping it to a more professional level. Sometimes it's just being able to put some words to it, of that there's 42 other emotions you can use to describe fear or scared or sad, right? And creating a dialogue around that. So that, I think, is probably the biggest outcome I'd like to see out of Headstrong, is that we're creating that dialogue and that understanding and removing that fear and stigma from acknowledging that it exists, recognizing it exists in yourself, and then creating the groups to support each other. No pressure, Pamela and Connie. No pressure.
No pressure. No pressure. Well, I better get off this call because there's lots for me to do. How's that? Connie, do you want to add anything before we wrap it up and thank Tanya?
Oh, Tanya, thank you so much. I've enjoyed listening to you and your advocacy for just the mental wellness of people, and just I like your straight talk. You don't put a lot of fluff in there. You just speak the truth, and I like that. And I agree. A good leader is someone who can acknowledge and have self-awareness of where they are struggling and also where they're strong. I agree with you fully. And so we just want to encourage everyone that's listening. You're not alone. We don't want you to journey alone. And there is a little bit of fear around vulnerability and just showing up into the Zoom room. I think that if we just can name that, like our friend Sarah said, name it to tame it. I liked that, Sarah. If we can do that and just realize that, yes, it takes some guts to show up in a group to get support, but that's what we're here for. And we promise that it's a safe place. I know Pamela would never do anything unless it was a safe place. And Headstrong, you are supported. You know, the group sessions are amazing. There's evidence-based work around it. There's counseling. There is no excuse for anyone to be suffering right now. And so if you are, please reach out. We are doing this for you. Our heart is to see you make it to the end of the finish line, wherever that is.
I love that, Connie. So again, thank you from the bottom of my heart, Tanya. And I might have bragged a little bit about you to the Headstrong team, but that's good. And honestly, just keep up your good work that you're doing in your community. You are so admired as such a strong leader. And we're all cheering you on every step of the way. So thanks for your
I really appreciate that, Pamela. And I think, you know, I look at this as, we hear the adage all the time, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to build a community. So it requires all of us to do the little things, you know, whether that's reaching out to a neighbor, whether that's whatever that is, right? So it takes all of us to build a great community, and mental health is part of that. We need to deal with those issues because it's an underlying issue in the community.
Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend. And much love to everybody. Remember the power of one. You have the power to be the change. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.